Hey guys, what's happening? So there are a few things I want to unpack in this one, and mainly with us talking about Pepper Potts and the rescue armor in response to a couple of leaked images that came out recently. But on top of that, I also want to highlight a few of the things that revolved around Pepper getting her armor in the comics and what that could possibly mean in Avengers 4. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so first and foremost, all of this is just really stemming from the leaked images we've seen of both Tony's new armor, which we've seen all over Reddit and Instagram and Twitter, pretty much everywhere. And I'll just go ahead and get my thoughts out of the way on this first, because with most people making the comparison to like the classic Mark V from Volume 1, like from Iron Man Volume 1, and don't take me wrong, Iron Man Volume 1 is definitely where this armor debuted, with it making slight variations over time to what we got in Tales of Suspense, to where we saw Tony Stark in the red and gold armor for the first time ever. But I had to say, like, in my opinion, if we are getting this armor, which if so, would definitely be an homage to Steve Ditko, rest in peace, and many props because the design has barely deviated from this over the course of time. But if we do get this armor, I still very much so believe that it will be pulling much of its inspiration from times of like your Dark Reign and New Avengers, when we saw Tony Stark either re-don this armor, like in Dark Reign where we saw Norman Osborn become head of S.H.I.E.L.D. after Secret Invasion, and much how it contributed to the plot of that narrative for Tony Stark in Dark Reign, with us seeing him go through a number of the older armors, going up against Norman Osborn. It was really more of a visual symbol of Tony Stark not giving up after everything was taken from him. But on top of that, if you go from Invincible Iron Man around Dark Reign and go to Avengers, your 2011 Avengers, which I believe was like your 4th volume of Avengers, which was written by Brian Michael Bendis with illustrations by John Romita Jr. But at this time in 2011, when the Avengers and Iron Man had to keep the hood from assembling all the Infinity Stones, the design of the armor that Tony Stark used to assemble the stones reverted heavily from what we had seen over so many years to like a mid-retro design that we got throughout Marvel's Heroic Age. So I'd have to say, if we are getting this armor, I do believe it'll be a lot closer to the Heroic Age rather than the original Steve Ditko designs. And I mainly say that because that would just follow suit with everything that they've been doing so far, with literally bringing visuals directly from the pages and bringing them directly to the screen, but also using slight variations visually when translating it to the screen, but also taking that same approach with the narrative, just like with Spider-Man Homecoming, so you notice it like at a glance is identical to the comics, but just like the visual, the narrative is also shuffled around. And like I mentioned in previous videos, that's a good thing because it just keeps us all guessing no matter how much of the comics we know. But getting back to Pepper Potts and more of your Invincible Iron Man around Dark Reign, when she received her armor, it was a combination of a tool not only to save her life, but also as a precaution for what was to come. Because during this time, in a suicide bombing that was an attempt to kill Tony Stark and also Pepper Potts, who was with him at a charity gala, Pepper Potts was seriously injured. She was buried in debris, and much of which entered her body and threatened both her heart and her spine. And so initially it wasn't like Tony was like, okay, here's a whole suit, but instead it was more like he gave her an arc reactor to keep much of it from entering her heart because she was too weak for conventional surgery. And this occurred within your first few issues of Invincible Iron Man leading up to Dark Reign. And as far as at this point what Tony shared with Pepper, he told her that it was more so something to save her life and help her regain her motive skills. But of course, as we know, Tony doesn't tell her everything. He doesn't tell anybody everything, but he is always thinking ahead. And through the course of him giving her these minor prosthetics, like her sight was improving, she didn't need glasses anymore, but during this time he was secretly preparing for her own suit of armor, which is something we will see come into play much later on throughout Dark Reign and also in Fear itself. And so real quick, the way I believe this translates into the films is like back around Iron Man 3, back when Pepper Potts was taken by AIM and exposed to Extremis, which gave her all the powers with the fire and everything, but it was dangerously unstable. But towards the end of that film, Tony said that he was going to fix whatever was wrong with her, which we know he did because later on we've seen Pepper Potts again and she's been a-okay ever since. But beyond that, we haven't got any thorough explanation. As far as we know, from that point forward, everything has just been okay. But what I do believe is with Pepper already having Extremis in her system, which in Iron Man 3 they said it was pretty much not reversible, but I believe that Tony not only used Extremis, which was a brain hacking technology, but put that in combination with his research in order to develop a solution that would not only keep Pepper alive, but also provide her armor should she need it. And I also say this because we've talked about before on our playlist with the MCU comics that tie in between the films that well after Iron Man 3 and even after Age of Ultron, Tony obsessed with finding as many solutions as he could to face what he felt like was coming, but also protect those who were closest to him. And as far as him taking these precautions for Pepper in the films, he wouldn't make it as obvious as putting an arc reactor in her chest, but instead he would have made it as subtle and undetectable as possible. But back in Invincible Iron Man, later on when you get closer into Dark Reign and you have Norman Osborn who takes over S.H.I.E.L.D. and turns it into Hammer, you had a brief moment when Pepper was given everything that Tony had left, and it was at this time when Norman Osborn and Hammer were closing in, mainly because Norman Osborn was looking for Tony Stark, and at this point it wasn't like Pepper had Happy because he passed away like back in Civil War, I want to say, but it was at this point in time when Pepper had seemed to be in despair to where she had accidentally come across the rescue armor that Tony Stark had put aside for her. And so within this armor, which is the Mk1616, it pretty much had all of your features of your general Iron Man suit, as far as like your flight and your repulsors, but it wasn't as advanced as like your Bleeding Edge armor, because for Tony Stark, that armor at this time was still new. And within this series of Invincible Iron Man, we wouldn't see the full manifestation of the Bleeding Edge armor until like 5 issues later. But also, before I forget, with this armor in relation to the Bleeding Edge armor, another thing that is very significant about Pepper's armor, the Mk1616, is that this armor, or a message left within this armor, was critical in combination to the Bleeding Edge armor, which for Tony being a physical part of Tony, both together were a critical part of bringing Tony Stark back to life, which once again was crucial when Tony Stark needed to bring James Rhodes back to life after he was killed by Thanos in Civil War II. And that we went into much more detail about, I believe, back in our Punisher, back when Punisher stole the War Machine armor, and I'll leave a link in the description for anybody who needs to go back and check that out. But yeah, those are just my thoughts real quick. Just wanted to drop that because in Avengers 4, I know we're all expecting for Cap to bite the dust, mainly because of Chris Evans' contract and everything. But you never know, they may flip it on us and make it Tony, because either way would actually be true to the comics. But at the same time, what if it's both? Because, you know, after Infinity War, man, I just know that the Russo brothers have no mercy as far as the heart of the audience being twisted more than once in the film. And on top of that, not to mention with the comment from Elizabeth Olsen that said that it's going to be worse for the heroes in Avengers 4, and I believe Chris Hemsworth said something similar as well. But with those comments, it's like, man, like, is Vision going to come back and die like 4 times? You never know, you just gotta be ready. But either way, that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know down in the comments if you believe that this armor is going to Pepper Potts, and what do you think about Extremis already being in her system, and how the films were like just all of a sudden she's okay. And last but not least, with Tony making this suit for her, is it not only to just protect her, but also as a contingency to bring him back after his time of death? Because at the end of the day, this really gives Robert Downey Jr. 2 options. Either they can leave him dead or have his hologram form continue, or they can just take this and lead it into Superior Iron Man, which is pretty clever for the film because they can go either way. But let me know you guys' thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.